This is wild. We're going to be talking about if Zach LaVine can possibly bring his trade value back up this season. And we're going to be talking about what Carmelo Anthony had to say about Zach LaVine and his current trade situation. This is your host, Rico Greenhowe, and you found yourself on another episode of Bulls Digest. And so we are jumping into what Carmelo Anthony had to say about Zach LaVine and his current trade situation. And then again, can Zach LaVine go ahead and recover his trade value going into this particular season? And so let's start with what Carmelo Anthony had to say, who I think is going to be a Hall of Famer. I think he is absolutely one of the best scorers to have ever played in the NBA. And I absolutely love everything that he was able to do, even though he didn't get a chance to win a championship. But this is what he said on his podcast. He said, look, I don't understand what's happening with Zach LaVine. He's a talent. He is somebody that if you get him on your team and you put him in a very good situation, you're going to see just how good he really is. That's just my opinion. There's no way he should be floating around every year. I understand the injuries and all that, but why he's floating around like that, this kid is super talented. All right, and so that is a pretty big statement and an endorsement from Carmelo Anthony. And I think that it's interesting because Carmelo Anthony is a scorer, right? And what do we consider Zach LaVine? He's a scorer. Is Carmelo Anthony going to be known for his defense? I would venture to say probably not. Is Zach LaVine ever going to be known for his defense? I would say probably not. So in my opinion, these two players are very similar with what they do. I understand that Carmelo is a different kind of scorer than Zach LaVine, but they both can do something, and that's put the ball in the basket. And so, look, I love everything that he said there as far as endorsing the fact that, yes, Zach LaVine is super talented, but I think he brings up something very critical in this quote where he says, look, I understand the injuries, but he's still talented. And with the injuries, when I break this down and I'm thinking about one of the players that I think historically signed a deal, and it might have been one of the worst injury situations out there. We're going to talk about that, and that's Grant Hill. And I'm going to compare this to what Carmelo Anthony did in his time in New York. And so all three players, we're looking at a 7-year span thus far. And so with Carmelo in his time with the Knicks, he played in 412 games. That's 7 years. And I want to put out there too as well that 27 of those games was in his first year, but 50 of those games were with the Denver Nuggets because he got traded there. So really, it's probably more in that 7-year span for him. But for the sake of it, just looking at the 7-year span in that Knicks jersey, 412 games played. He averaged 24 points a game, 24.7, 7 rebounds a game, and then 3.2 assists. Now, Zach LaVine, in his time, 7 seasons, 374 games played. One of those seasons was shortened in 2020, I believe. And then you look at the fact that he, in fact, averaged 24.2 points a game. He's averaging 4.7 rebounds a game and 4.3 assists a game, all right, in 374 games. Now, Grant Hill, in 7 years, all right, he signed a 7-year, $92 million deal, and he played in 200 games out of, the possible 574 that he could have played in if it's an 82-game season. And so can you imagine, just from an injury standpoint, if that were Zach LaVine, all right? And so this whole thing in the media about him being this player that is always injured, you have to look at that and just think about that. Like if it were a situation like, in that with Grant Hill, like that absolutely suggests that this is a player that is always injured. And so I've said it before. I think that a lot of the stuff that is put out there, with this whole narrative, it's just a bit much with that. And so you get a chance to see that. And in comparison to a guy like Carmelo Anthony, you see that it's really not all that bad, 374 compared to 412. Now, another thing that we want to talk about now is, can he now bring his value back up this season? And I think it is possible for Zach LaVine to do so. I think that in this particular situation, the team is set up now that it's going to be operating at a little bit faster pace. And I think that if they're playing at a faster pace, that does help Zach LaVine as far as upping his trade value. I think that you're going to see just how athletic he is. And I think they're going to be able to feature him. And I think that Zach LaVine is going to be able to showcase himself and not really have to force the action, because they're not necessarily going to be running a lot of half court sets. And I've said this before with Zach LaVine, that I feel like he's much better served when you open it up. I mean, if you look at Lonzo, you look at the success that they had when they were one of the top teams in that particular year before Lonzo went down. A lot of those highlight clips, you see LaVine getting those leak out dunks. You'll see him getting alley-oops. You'll see him getting backdoor passes and things like that. And I think that once Lonzo went down, the Chicago Bulls went away from that stuff. And the whole thing now is that with Giddey, with Kobe White, they're thinking that they're going to be able to open it up and play somewhat that type of style. And then he's also, too, got Lonzo coming back, at least for this season, at least till the trade deadline, or maybe until they end up doing something there. But he perhaps can get back to that. If Lonzo gets back to, 80-90% of what he used to be, then you can imagine that there's going to be times where Zoe and LaVine are going to be playing together. So that suggests that it's going to be a pretty good chemistry, and that he could go ahead and bring his trade value up. Next, another thing that I found interesting is that we all talk about the fact that, yes, he can go get buckets. And I looked at what he has done traditionally in his All-Star year. He averaged 27 points a game. And I'm saying to myself, like, okay, if we know he can score, how much more scoring can he do in order for a GM or a team to go out there and say, okay, we want him, and now, he's good enough to come over, whatever. And I just think that, like, if you put him in a situation where he has to go out there and score, then I don't think that that's necessarily going to get him traded sooner, if that makes sense. Like, I think he's going to have to be in a situation where he just mixes well with the team. And I don't think that they necessarily have to win. And I say that because the Chicago Bulls are not expected to win the Eastern Conference. They're not expected to even secure a playoff spot. And I think it would be quite an interesting season if they were to get a play in. And I think that they're going to be right there because they're not as bad to go ahead and just outright tank. So, I want to see, can Zach LaVine be still an efficient scorer, not necessarily have to go over 27 points a game or put up all-star numbers like he did, but can he now defer to a Kobe White? Could he defer to Josh Giddey? Could he be okay with now having to watch the finish of the game if Patrick Williams is going out here and he's cooking that day, or Modest Buzelis has it going, or Ayo has it going? Like, is he going to be in a situation where he can still, walk up to the media, answer the question, and not just storm off the court if that happens? I think that maybe is more so going to be, I think, the sign for another GM to go ahead and say, okay, if he can defer and he can also play in different situations and be okay with the fact that he might have to sit out down the stretch or come off the bench or whatever the Chicago Bulls do, then that might be enough for a team that is looking to win to now say to themselves, okay, we are ready to go out here and get Zach LaVine, and perhaps he will be that missing piece. Because let's say that he goes to a team that he's been linked to, whether it's Golden State, whether it is Philadelphia, which we know that ship is sailed, or the Lakers or whoever, he's going to more than likely be that third or fourth option on the team. And quite frankly, there might be other players that they really have it going that night, and he might have to take a lesser role, but he's still going to have to show that he can be efficient and help that team, win or get out of a series, which I think he can do so. But I think that this is the first step and the most important step for him to go ahead and up his trade value. So with that being said, what are you thinking in the comments? Let me know. Do you think that these injuries that have been placed on Zach LaVine, or all this news around his injuries, are a bit over the top with that. Do you think that Zach LaVine can, yes, in fact, go out there and up his trade value by simply just taking a back seat, being okay with that, but just becoming a more efficient player? And keep in mind with this last comment, Zach LaVine had 71, 72 of his teammates that aren't in the NBA. And I guarantee you, if he goes to another team and he's playing with other franchise players, I bet you those teams and those players have not been set up that way, where the majority of their teammates are not in the NBA. I'd love to see a stat that way. So Zach LaVine would be going to a much better constructed roster, which I think is going to help him. So let me know in the comments what you were thinking. Just want to let you know that 65.6% of you that watch the videos are not subscribed to the channel. So please make sure that you continue to slam dunk on that subscribe button. It means a lot to me as we try to reach 5,000 subscribers before the NBA season starts. And even though we're talking about Zach LaVine possibly going ahead and upping his trade value for next season, and we're not even close to the season, I'm still saying go Bulls, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.